Bienvenidos a todos y a todas a esta serie de diálogos.
Welcome everybody to the dialogues. Escazú Agreement, Human Rights and Healthy Ecosystems. These dialogues are going to be in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation to English and Portuguese.
Please click in the bottom of your screen and there you can choose your channel. Please stay in the same channel. Esta sesión será grabada. Mi nombre es Claudia.
This session is going to be recorded. I'm Claudia Ituarte Lima. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a researcher and an environmental lawyer, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session. This dialogue series, it's organized by the Stockholm University, the UNDP for Latin America and the Caribbean. Is also co-organized by the Environmental UN Program and the High Office of the United Nations in Human Rights, as well as the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. This session is funded by the Swedish International Cooperation Agency. The General Secretary of the United Nations in 2020 made a call to action for human rights. Part of this call to action was to request several organizations, and specifically the UN agencies, to support governments to develop legislations and policies related to a healthy environment. In October 2021, for the first time in history, the UN Human Rights Council recognized that having a healthy environment is a human right. The objective of this dialogue series is to catalyze action to implement the Escazú Agreements, also with human rights international treaties related to healthy environments and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Escazú Agreement is an innovation regarding participatory democracy, and it generates interest not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in other countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, in how the participation could be done during the negotiation process of these treaties. As you know, and as it is explained in the preliminary material, the Escazú Agreement recognizes three rights: right to information, that it's easy to obtain; right to public participation. We need to open these participation spaces; access to justice in case there are risks of any rights violations. The Secretary General highlighted that the Escazú Agreement is an historic one, with the potential of enable structural changes to face the key challenges of our time: the climate change crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the environmental crisis. And there's also some challenges in the implementation of this agreement, and also opportunities. We want to know from you, what are your perspectives? So, many of you have answered a poll that helped us design this dialogue series. I'm going to ask my colleague Madeleine to present some graphs related to this. We can see that in 54% of legislation of the people who answered to this poll, they consider that there is proper legislation about access rights. So this is done, but it's not correctly applied. So there's a potential to work closely with the judicial organization and with the governments of the different countries. 30% said that there is proper legislation about access rights, but it's not aligned to the Escazú Agreement. There's another opportunity to make reforms and align the legislation with the Escazú Agreement. 12% said that there is no national legislation about access rights. Here we can have an experience exchange between the countries that already have the legislation and the other countries. Next one. We can see there is a lack of coordination between the government-backed initiatives and the people in charge of tackling this challenge. So we are going to discuss how to face these challenges. Before leaving the floor with our first panelist, we want to ask you a question. On your screen, you're going to see the poll. We want to know if your work is focused on human rights, on the environment, or the connection between human rights and the environment, or in other issue. We'll give you a minute to respond.
Mi colega Madeleine nos va a presentar los resultados.
My colleague Madeleine is going to present the results. Okay, we see that most people is working on human rights and the environment. That's 54%. We have other group focused on the environment and others on human rights. Many of us are experts in this topic. When this dialogue series ends, we want to meet with other people that are not experts so we can spread the message. Now, next question, please. In your opinion, to what extent is knowledge on the human rights and healthy ecosystems nexus spread across the state institutions in your country or countries you work in? Only very few persons or functions, somewhat but not evenly spread across state institutions, fairly spread across state institutions, or it permeates throughout state institutions. We'll give you a moment to reply.
Mostrar las respuestas, por favor.
Okay, now please show the answers. We see that 55% of people have the knowledge but not spread across state institutions. So now we have an interesting challenge in which we can focus on, and we're going to discuss some strategies to do that.
Bueno, ahora vamos a empezar nuestro panel.
Well, now we're going to start our panel. I would like to leave the floor with Jairo Acuña Alfaro. He is the team leader for Latin America and the Caribbean's governance team from the UN. He has a vast experience in governance, public sector. He has degrees from the Oxford University and the Costa Rica National University. We're going to ask Jairo, what are the key elements that should be included in a common narrative by the United Nations agencies to support the implementation of the Escazú Agreement in synergy with the international commitments concerning healthy ecosystems. So, how the UN organizations can support, and you have the floor, Jairo. Hello, Claudia. Good morning and good afternoon to our colleagues. I'm going to answer your question. I think that the nexus is to understand that environmental justice doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of the efforts, the governance efforts, and we need to see how the governments, not only institutions, but also the citizens understand the environmental issues and how important it is to protect and safeguard the natural resources. Now, how can we build a narrative? I would like to present or to propose three messages on that narrative for the Latin American and the Caribbean context. First is that the current context of COVID-19 has put us in an exclusion crisis, and there's a lack of access to rights. In some places, the gaps have increased, discrimination and institutional violence has increased, and the environmental issues are not exempt from this crisis. This is also a power crisis, and it's a governance issue. It could be also an opportunity, as it was said, to rebuild that relationship between people and institutions, and between people, and also between people and environmental issues. I think this is very important. There's also the human rights part. The UN Human Rights Council recognized a clean, healthy environment is a basic human right. And the question is, well, how can we protect this right? And how can we strengthen the institutions to they not only have the knowledge, but they can put it in practice? The second message of the narrative is related to redefine the social contracts to ensure environmental justice and inclusive justice. So it's also necessary to redesign the institutions, as your second question said, so they can be the basis for sustainable development focused on people. And our Global Human Development Report from 2020 reminding us about the importance that this is the time to act, not only for people, but also the government institutions that are linked to that social contract. And finally, the third message of this narrative needs to be that the justice access policy have a cumulative effect, and they bring the citizens and the government closer. We need to improve trust in institutions and improve governability on the local level. This is where the environmental issues are landed. This is going to help strengthen justice, is going to facilitate access to information, and it's going to promote citizen participation without fear. We just finished a report about innovation, resilience, and urgent transformation towards an inclusive justice, and we concluded this analysis with an analogy. Innovation in justice is innovation in governance. And the same here, innovation in environmental justice is innovation in governance, is innovation in renewing a social contract for Latin America, and we have the opportunity to rebuild it. This is a commitment that we've undertaken in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we, from our offices, are promoting this throughout the region. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much, Jairo. These are very important elements to bring all these global commitments to the local, national level, and how can we relate it with the social justice. Thank you. Now, Santiago Carricosa is our next speaker. He is Senior technical advisor on ecosystems and biodiversity for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has advised several countries in projects for conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity, also in climate change issues. He is a biologist and has a PhD on environmental policies, and he has over 30 years of experience in environmental issues. The question is, how is the UNDP supporting implementation of the Escazú Agreement through biodiversity and ecosystem projects in the Latin American and the Caribbean region? Thank you, Claudia, for that question. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this event. And I would like to start with my concern, since now more than ever we need all the help that we can get to face the fourth crisis threatening mankind and the planet. First, the pandemic crisis. Second, the biodiversity crisis. Third, the climate change crisis. And four, the pollution and waste, liquid and solid waste crisis. And the common denominator for these four crises is us, mankind. And these crises are so close to each other and have such severe impacts that we need to address them jointly. We cannot choose one over the other. These are crises threaten our very existence. It's like having a dead battery and a flat tire in our car. If we just fix the tire, we're still we can go anywhere. But I was asked to talk about the biodiversity crisis, our projects that are helping mitigate it, and how these projects can contribute to the Escazú Agreement implementation. First, the flora and fauna diversity is what makes the planet work. This biodiversity ensures oxygen on the air, food on land and sea, and if we lose this biodiversity, then the system is going to start failing. And this is what's happening now, not only in Latin America, but throughout the world. We know that close to 1 million species are endangered, and this complicates our future. Climate change, pollution, and solid waste are a big cause of the loss of this biodiversity, but mainly the unsustainable agricultural systems are responsible for 80% of deforestation, and also responsible of 70% of the loss of biological diversity. Also, the mining industry is another cause, along with the timber industry and invasive species. Also, fishing is threatening biological diversity on the sea, and the international communities has had the international treaties for biodiversity and ecosystems. We have the Biodiversity Convention that was an international law since 28 years ago. And the three objectives of this convention are: first, the conservation of biodiversity; second one, its sustainable use; and third, a fair participation or division of the resources. These objectives need to be converted into a reality for each government. There are also resources given through the Environmental World Fund, and this is where the UNDP comes along, because we support the countries to obtain and execute financial aid from the World Fund. In this moment, we have 52 biodiversity and ecosystem projects for 23 countries in the region. These are projects that contribute to the right of a healthy environment, which is crucial in the Escazú Agreement. And as Claudia and Javier said, and the projects respond to environmental priorities from the countries, and they include projects to create protected areas, and strengthening management activities for the financial sustainability of the area. We have projects to mitigate the threats on biodiversity, for example, the threat of the unsustainable agricultural systems. And we have projects that support a fair participation for the benefits derived from the use of natural resources. All these projects that want to deliver social and financial benefits are very important in this moment. And these projects are not consistent with the Escazú Agreement. They are a bridge between human rights and environmental rights, as we heard before. And these projects support the rights of to access information, citizen participation, and justice, which are the key accesses of the Escazú Agreement. And our projects support these rights through social and environmental standards known as safeguards. This way, we reinforce the capabilities of the governments to implement these rights. And in practice, this means that the stakeholders that live in the areas where these projects are developed, they participate in the design, implementation, and monitoring of the projects, and they need to agree with the design of the project and that they want to participate in the project. The UNDP needs to guarantee that that environmental and social safeguard program is applied, because this is a right of the affected parties, and these are direct and indirect benefits, and they can participate in the development and the implementation of our projects. In the end, these projects, what they seek is to modify human behavior in order to implement the three objectives of the Biological Diversity Convention. Thank you. Thank you very much, Santiago. It was a good reminder of the nexus between biodiversity and healthy ecosystems. This is a vital link in order to bring along a series of human rights. Now, we have Javier Mena. He's the joint controller for the Office of Defense of Human Rights and Environmental Rights. He's had several tasks for the office in several countries like Colombia, Guatemala, and Bolivia. We're gonna ask him how to NHR experience monitoring and advice on domestic implementation of international instruments could support the implementation of the Escazú Agreement, synergy with human rights and international treaties. Javier, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Claudia. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you for the invitation to the University of Stockholm and the UNDP and the Environmental Governance Program. Thank you for the question. I would like to start saying that this is an historic moment. 8 days ago, on October 8, the Human Rights Council had it recognized the right of access to a clean and healthy environment. And this is an unprecedented victory for these and next generations to ensure the enjoyment of a safe environment, healthy ecosystems, and a less toxic environment with access to environmental justice and the participation in this process. This needs to be highlighted because it's an historic landmark. And the countries on Latin America and the Caribbean have played a very important role. The most significant achievement is the first treaty, environmental treaty, and this is the first one in the world to include environmental activists. And the Escazú Agreement, it's a binding instrument to protect the environment. We have environmental justice, protection of environmental activists, and As Michelle Bachelet said, facing social injustice, the Escazú Agreement is one of the most effective tools to make governments accountable and also to protect the planet's health. I would like to mention the links between the Escazú Agreement, the human rights treaties, and the environmental activists. I would like to highlight the human rights approach of the agreement. I'd like to highlight that the agreement treats essential topics to implement human rights treaties with more general standards. And the example is the access to justice, but that they need a reinforced treatment with specific measures. In this sense, the UN system has recognized the Escazú Agreement as a normative tool that complements, reinforce the duties of the governments regarding access to information, access to justice, and participation of civil society established in the international human rights treaties. So their organizations could contribute to their implementation, recommending their implementation, especially assessing the performance of the governments in dialogues and tests, also reports special procedures and the periodic exam. We also need to highlight the progress to recognize the right to live in a healthy environment and the synergy that we can generate between this general recognition and the specific obligation of the Escazú Agreement. I would also like to highlight the concern shown by the UN system on the protection of environmental activists. This is reflected in several statements of the Human Rights Council. On this is especially important since Latin America is considered one of the most dangerous areas for those who defend the environment, including for indigenous peoples and local communities. And to mention, I'd like to mention the participation of civil society. I think we need to highlight the agreement content in establishing the right to participation and also the participation of the civil society. And for this, thanks to the mechanisms for this matter. This is important because the public mechanism that we had to create the Escazú Agreement provided a huge help to civil society. And the representative of civil society were able to participate in the meetings, but they weren't able to vote. However, civil society had a lot of influence since they were able to distribute this to the governments. And to finish, I would like to say that we need a formal recognition to a universal treaty, and the example of the Escazú Agreement should lead us to have a global pact for the environment. The global recognition of human rights is going to bring more benefits for people and the communities that face human right violation and the effects of the climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Javier, por tu presentación. Es sumamente importante resaltar los...
Thank you very much, Javier, for your presentations. It's very important to highlight those aspects that you've mentioned, including the situation of the environmental defenders, according to the Global Witness Organization of 2020. There were more than 220 killings worldwide of environmental defenders. It's an urgent and very serious situation. And there are many countries in which this situation is critical, and I know this firsthand, what you're mentioning. In terms of the different treaties that you've mentioned, well, we also see how the Escazú Agreement is actually at the forefront of these discussions, and other countries around the world can see these processes, and we're very glad that During sign up, we noticed there was a lot of interest in other countries regarding this. I'll now give the floor to Maria Candela Zafiro Taquetti. She's an Argentinian attorney focused on diplomacy and international public service. She works in the International Office of the UNHCR of a conservancy group. Before this, she worked in the legal office of the Ministry of Infrastructure of Buenos Aires in Argentina. So, Maria, from your perspective, what are these key elements that you think should be included in this narrative from the perspective of the UN to support this implementation of the Escazú Agreement in synergy with these international commitments related to healthy ecosystems? The floor is yours, Maria. Thank you very much, Claudia. Before starting, I would like to give my thanks for this initiative and the invitation. We're very happy to be with the Sweden Organization for the Environment for Nature and UNDP. I've been asked to emphasize also the relationship between human rights and environmental rights, and with regards to the defenders of human rights in environmental affairs. Before starting, I'd like to highlight the following. The entry into force of the Escazú Agreement is a reason for celebration. It's an important achievement for environmental democracy globally and regionally. The agreement seeks to guarantee healthy environment and guarantee our access to information, participation, and access to justice in environmental matters. It's an environmental and human rights treaty. It's the first treaty that includes specific dispositions for the protection of environmental defenders and includes a focus on rights to face a triple planetary threat that you've referenced. The agreement is built on one of the pillars of environmental governance, Principle 10 of the Rio de Janeiro Declaration of 1992, and on the voluntary directives that were agreed in 2010 globally within the Global Administration Council, and it's a milestone for environmental governance in the region by providing it a common legal framework. The entry into force of the agreement, which was this past April 22 on the National Global Earth Day, draws attention to the urgent need to restore the planet's ecosystem. For this, we need to deal with a triple planetary threat: global warming, loss of biodiversity, and contamination. The Escazú Agreement is a powerful tool for giving the steps to build more sustainable organizations. In the point 16 of the 2030 Agreement, a great community accepted by the global community not to leave anyone behind. Protecting the defenders and allowing them to manage their own lands will also help tackle the triple planetary threat. This was because the areas managed by local communities that are a great percentage of defenders have constantly shown that they show less degradation, and this focus on rights is important in the framework of negotiations, the future agreement of the post-2020 agreement for biodiversity. I would also like to highlight the following. This Escazú agreement connects environmental rights with human rights in a very clear way, and is particularly relevant in perspective because, again, as has been commented, our region has the highest indexes in inequality and the difference between social and environmental is impossible to separate. The agreement puts emphasis on people and communities that are in situations of greater vulnerability, offering concrete tools to facilitate access to rights. The agreement has a central focus in Chapter 1, and it establishes the implementation to a healthy environment. This is something that many of the conclusions in the region already recognize, but not all. And it's also a contribution to the road made globally for the recognition of the human right to a healthy environment. This recognition formally by the state will help raise environmental rights along with human rights acknowledged for a long time, and will also help in implementation on that land by the tribunals, the citizens, and governments. I would like to highlight again what my colleagues have already commented. The past October 8th, there was a milestone internationally on these matters led by the UN Human Rights Council after this historical decision after many years of hard work by the civil organizations, environmental activists, and all the people who have struggled for the international recognition to a human right to a healthy environment, to consider the UN to the right to have an healthy environment becomes a universal right. Something else I'd like to share with you. I'm about to come up. The Escazú Agreement has become the first binding agreement in the world to include specific dispositions for the protection of human rights offenders' environmental rights in Article 9, recognizing the difficulties that the people have that lead environmental struggles in the region through the establishment of commitments by the states to promote, defend, and protect their defenders of rights in environmental matters. I'm taking note of a very critical situation in a region that great number of attacks on murders and violation of human rights of the environmental defenders for those who are in the front line fighting for our rights and those of the environment. To wrap up, I'd like to highlight in the regional frame, in addition to signing the agreement, countries have achieved great progress from a formal point through the creation of environmental rights and protection of environment in many of our constitution, including environmental law and establishing specialized tribunals and specialized prosecutors that try to raise the standards for protection of the rights of our citizens in environmental matters. Of course, this is a road. It's important to keep strengthening the tools and above all, to put into practice those that, although they are already recognized formally, cannot become reality in the life of many of the population, especially of those people who are in situations of vulnerability. Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you, Maria. You gave us many examples. There is progress, there are challenges in terms of jurisprudence, for instance, in Latin American countries. Again, many countries are looking towards jurisprudence in the sense of how there's an integration of the socio-ecological that is not divided. It's not a single case of a climate or biodiversity, but looking into practice, how they interact. And this crisis, although it's global, has very local, very real manifestations in the lives of people, of the populations that many times are in situations of vulnerability, as you mentioned, but also are agents of change, taking these cases to court, becoming organized in terms of participation, accessing to information, and the different elements that you mentioned. Now we're going to move on to, I don't know, to question and answer sessions in this part of our panel. But before, I would like to mention that we're going to have a session, what we call a jump board, where you'll be able to share with us your perspectives on two questions. But before, I would like to know if there are requests for clarification. I can see one that's been asked. I would like to ask on the concept of how the concept of environment is being managed today, with a difference between social and social, according to UN. Social is one of component of environmental. Maybe you mean economic, social, and ecological benefits in the area of economic sciences. I hear this classification a lot, and I think it's not accurate and dangerous as it leaves the social away from the environmental. What we're trying to do in this series of dialogues is to see the integration between of the socio-ecological, because we understand, like you were mentioning, I was mentioning in the presentation, these elements cannot be separated and they need to be tackled in a systematic manner. I'll leave the floor to Santiago for this question. Thank you, Claudia, for your question. And thank you for the participant for this important question. Yes, in fact, in all of our projects, whether they are biodiversity or land degradation or climate change projects, we need to take into account all of the dimensions. We need to take into account the social dimension, the ecological dimension, the economic dimension, because we can't keep moving forward without keeping this balance. And this is basically what is being reinforced. Precisely last week came to the end the conference of the parts on biological biodiversity, in which the countries agreed in what was mostly a political statement, the Kunming statement, that we need to tackle all of these dimensions in an adequate manner. In the Kunming statement, the importance of the participation of the indigenous groups and local communities was highlighted in all projects of biodiversity, of climate change, the need to increase the goal or raise the goal, the conservation of land and marine ecosystems. In goal 30 by 30, 30% of marine ecosystems, 30% land ecosystems need to be conserved by 2030. And there's also a lot of emphasis on the need to reorient economic subsidies that are destroying our environment. And that's an example of these three dimensions that are so important: the economic, the social, and ecologic dimension that need to be taken into account in all initiatives and in all the commitments of the countries to move forward with these initiatives and achieve these benefits that are environmental at the global and local levels. Thank you, Santiago. We also see in the discussions, there's a discussion on how we see the social and ecological getting interrelated, in the sense that we can no longer see as pillars, one pillar, the economic, one pillar, the social, one pillar, the environmental, but rather they all depend on these systems of life, of systems of operation, of ecological functioning. So there are these discussions on how we conceptualize, and it's very important to tackle them in the sense that they allow us to see in a more clear way how these crises that we've been discussing are interrelated. Here we have another question on Agreement 169. How does the Escazú Agreement connect to it, considering that although it's been in practice for many years and the recognition of the countries in this agreement, its application has not had the force required for the real and effective inclusion of the indigenous peoples? I'll give the floor to Javier to answer this question. Okay, thank you very much, Claudia, for the question. I think it's very pertinent because Agreement 169 of the OIT is one that encompasses the rights of the indigenous peoples. And this is something, like I said at the time of my intervention, this generates a synergy that has to happen. Recognition, the general recognition of the specific obligations of the Escazú Agreement with the specific obligations that a specific agreement or international agreement needs to include. And I think this is important to mention because it allows the UN system to identify the commitments that each country has been identifying, can be in the terms of the protection of indigenous peoples through the performance that the states have in the constant dialogue with the UN system. For instance, with the exams of the treaty organs, with the reports that are made, reports of the special procedures and or treaty organs, and also with the periodical universal exam. I think we need to identify the role performed by the universal protection system with the different international treaties and how this push, because in fact what the Escazú Agreement does is push towards other international treaties for the protection of human rights. In this case, Agreement 169, I think it becomes reinforced with a binding instrument. And I repeat this is binding for the countries that have ratified it. 4 countries in Latin America have already done so. A regional office for South America, and that's why I mentioned it. And we need to try that all the countries ratify it because it reinforces the protection of human rights and the environment. Thank you. Thank you very much, Javier. And in terms of all international treaties that Latin American countries and the Caribbean are part of, they're all part of the Biological Diversity Agreement that Santiago mentioned, and they're all part of certain international treaties, like the Children's Rights Treaty and the Escazú Agreement reinforces all of these instruments. So it's an opportunity to strengthen that environmental governance that was mentioned by Jairo in his participation. So I would like to give the floor now to Jairo to make a reflection in terms of these indigenous rights in the application of the Escazú Agreement and how they relate to each other. Thank you very much, Claudia. I think the colleagues Javier and Santiago have answered this. Maybe reinforce the importance that the environmental matters are not isolated from the context. I think this is something of how we compose that social contract and that behavior with the environmental topics. Unfortunately, well, positively on the one part, there have been important steps forward in matters of environmental justice, but also this topic has become one of the catalysts for social conflictivity. That's why we see inequality and this lack of respect that we've seen in environmental affairs. I think that the agreement we are discussing as a general framework of compliance of developmental topics, what it's aiming at is to see how institutionality is strengthened to respond to that challenge. And in the question that you were asking with the audience participating, I think that it was very clear. It's important to give the opportunity to the institutions to adapt, to innovate, to understand what these new dynamics are and how we answer to people more that are directly affected in a way that's more direct, people who are in a greater condition of vulnerability. The crisis that has been presented by COVID-19, we need to understand it as an opportunity for defining that social contract, and that redefinition of that social contract starts through two avenues, so to speak. It starts by recomposing our relationship with nature and how we respect those natural resources, but secondly, how we respect people-centered development, a human rights approach. Thank you very much, Jairo. And here we have more interventions from the people with us in this dialogue. Say, talking about socio-ecological is a step forward, but on the other hand, like my Argentinian compatriot, there's a lot of regulations and jurisprudence, and now I celebrate the Escazú Agreement, but regulations already existed with the national institutions and others. There's another question here also, and what they're asking is that, okay, the regulations exist, but they need to be followed, as we saw in the survey that we did, 64% saying that there's this lack of rule of environmental law. So and I would like to give the floor to Maria so she can give us her perspective on this question. Thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you for the question. In fact, it's something that's very important that we need to start to visualize. I think that it doesn't only go from environmental matters, but in the entire region, there's a problem between the what we have and how we implement our regulations. There is a lot of coordination that should take place between the state and the participation of civil society, of the actors of the private sector. It's something that needs to be worked on, but like you mentioned, we need to celebrate it because in a way, this treaty is binding, as has already been commented. It's very important for the region. All the progress that we've made in matters of jurisprudence, in principles of jurisprudence, are very relevant and they are an example worldwide. So just to highlight, when we talk about environmental governance, we're not referring to, and we're referring to a number of tools that have as objective to guarantee the rights of the citizens. And when we speak of a number of tools, we are also talking about this Escazú Agreement as a legal instrument. We also have others of policies and measures that states put into play to advance the development of human rights and environmental rights. And the most valuable thing of the agreement that was negotiated in the region and for the region, and that has follow the circumstances and the legal frameworks that our countries have. So I believe it's a time for investigating and analyzing jointly how we're going to move forward towards the implementation of the Escazú Agreement, respecting all the legislations on the matters, our national constitutions that refer to the right to a healthy environment. So I invite you all. I think it's something we need to work on regionally and where the states need to accompany us in a very direct and very committed way. Thank you, Maria. I'm going to give the floor to Javier so he can quickly help us wrap up this session. We have the jump board that we're very interested that all the people participate on. So I'll ask him to have a very brief participation. Thank you, Claudia, for this opportunity. I just wanted to reinforce something that was mentioned by Maria Candela, and it's that the Escazú Agreement is a regulatory instrument that complements, reinforces, and makes concrete the duties of the state in the matters of access to information, access to justice, and the participation of civil society, and that there are already other instruments in existence. I want to highlight something. It acts in support of the other ones that already exist, and it's also a binding agreement, which gives it greater force, and I wanted to contribute that. Thank you very much. And this question of the implementation, which is why it's the focus of this series of dialogues, implementation. And also, well, we have institutions of the state, we have intergovernmental institutions, but how does collective action of people also play a central role? And we're going to see that in our next session, where we'll see the presentations by indigenous people's leaders, of youth, and this role of international institutions of human rights can also help catalyze these actions. Now, I would like us to go into the Jamboard. My colleague Marion has set up a link in chat that I would appreciate if you could all open. And there you can see the question. Many of the causes for environmental degradation have their origin at the international level, not just in Latin America and the Caribbean. So the question is, how can global cooperation contribute to the exercise of the right to a healthy environment recognized in the Escazú Agreement? So we're going to ask you to please double-click one of the two links there and start filling in your answers. We want to hear from you. We've had several participations from different perspectives, so we'd like to ask you to please contribute with your participation. We have some minutes set aside for this.
A ver, ya veo que empiezan a verse algunas de las respuestas. Vamos a dar un minuto más. Okay. Bien, las personas que hayan estado ya pensando en sus preguntas pueden hacerlo de manera anónima. Si lo ponen, se presentará de manera anónima, o también pueden poner su nombre al lado del post-it si quieren que identifiquemos quién escribió. Bien. Voy a empezar a resaltar algunas de ellas. Que las empresas transnacionales puedan ser demandadas en sus países de origen para remediar e indemnizar cuando contaminen en un país distinto. Otra es revisión de las políticas económicas y su relación con el medio ambiente. ¿Qué hacer con aquellas economías? Son básicamente extractivistas y responden a la demanda internacional. Bueno, esta es una pregunta que también podemos abordar en nuestra siguiente sesión del panel. Continuar la colaboración de manera cercana y efectiva. Paneles de incidencia con las autoridades estatales y las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Redes de apoyo local, regional, internacional. Y bueno, tenemos, por ejemplo, la iniciativa del Programa de Naciones Unidas de Medio Ambiente, que apoya específicamente a los defensores ambientales. Entonces, bueno, ya tenemos aquí específicas iniciativas con las que se podrían vincular. Trabajo con las empresas transnacionales, mineras, petroleras, para respetar las leyes y normas nacionales, crear espacios de discusión y para fomentar el respeto de las decisiones de los pueblos indígenas. Aquí tenemos una en inglés, la voy a traducir. Intercambiar experiencias para realmente implementar la justicia ambiental y aprender acerca de otras partes del mundo. Crear tribunales ambientales regionales cuando los ciudadanos no pueden tener resoluciones en sus países. Aquí hay uno de nosotros como indígenas cuidamos al medio ambiente. Hace falta mayor conocimiento sobre los territorios de parte de los estados y las organizaciones civiles. Escuchar más la voz de quienes vivimos en el territorio y vivimos estas realidades. Bien, pues tenemos muchas intervenciones.
Okay, we have many interventions. Here we'll make
We've
sure
had
that
great participation. We're going to gather them
and
all,
are
and this
reflected
would be
in the
reflected
final
in the
report of this event. We have time to
report.
go.
If you have any other comments,
You can
can
write it in the
put
post-its,
it
and
on
we'll
the
ensure
post-its, and we make sure to consider them.
we'll
Now,
move on to the next
we'll
question.
move on to the next question. On
the
the
top, you'll see
upper
an
part,
arrow,
you can see an
and
arrow.
if you can click on that arrow, you'll see the next
on the
question.
part of the arrow, you're going to see the question.
How does public participation of women, minorities, and other groups contribute to getting positive results, both for people and for nature? This interaction of the socio-ecological to actually apply, exercise all the rights to food, to nutrition, to health. That's what we want to know from you, and it's very important to see how these groups are vulnerable. And right now, we would like to see these groups as agents of change. We see in Latin America, there are many examples in Latin America and the Caribbean of how these people are making changes. So we want to hear from your perspectives on this question. Okay, we have 1 minute to reflect. And then we'll ask you to write down your answers.
Bien, ya tuvimos un momento para reflexionar. Si pueden empezar a poner sus respuestas, se los agradeceríamos mucho. Aquí tenemos una respuesta. Las políticas públicas deben ser integrales e incluir la perspectiva de todos los ciudadanos que se ven afectados.
Public policy needs to include the perspective of all citizens affected including the perspective of women, young people, and minorities. This is going to contribute to a comprehensive approach for these issues. This is what Santiago was saying. All these benefits from biodiversity and ecosystem services. This has a wide range. If we consider all these benefits, all these contributions from nature, we are going to have more opportunities to exercise the healthy environment right, not only for this generation, but future ones as well. Okay, political participation, it's a crucial tool, but we still need the right to say no in a previous consultation. This is related to what was previously mentioned, that consent needs to be free and informed. This is recognized in the Indigenous Peoples Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Women play a very important role in the conservation of biodiversity at a local level. So their empowerment is key to protect these resources. We have another one. Women and minorities face different challenges towards climate change. Their participation is crucial to implement real solutions. Climate change is affecting all the contributions from nature to people, so the local participation can generate early warnings for many of these impacts. Many people who live in the city don't even realize about this. So we need to think about the people who live in the forest, in the desert, and other ecosystems to find real solutions that could be implemented. Also, rethink the proposals that are able to permeate what was established from the governments. So, legislations and policies developed from the government need to have information about the local realities, and public participation. It's what makes this interaction between the right holders and the government so they can reach creative solutions. Also contribute to have a binding perspective from the perspective of the different social works, and this needs to be a realist proposal. And as we said on the first part, this reality, our continent, Latin America and the Caribbean, it's highly rich in biodiversity and ecosystem services. So this is a great opportunity, and there's also challenges. The policies need to adapt to this reality. Well, I see that replies keep coming. We want this to be reflected on the report that we're going to share with all of you. I would like to end with one in English. I'm going to translate it. Women feel more... Just a second. Women feel more the connection with the earth, with the water cycles, with the environment. If women are involved, then this is going to be part of the solution. We also have replies in English, and we're going to make sure that everything is included in the final report. Now, we're going to move forward to our last question. Well, looking at the time, I think we're going to move along with the roundtable, and we're going to put a final question on the Jamboard. Now you all know how to use it. It's very simple. And as you can see, this enables us to gather the feedback from all the participants. Now I'm going to leave the floor to José Apolonio Tobar. He coordinates the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. I'm going to ask Marjorie to start the roundtable, please. So, as we know, the national human rights institutions have a key role in monitoring and advising for the national implementation of the international treaties and also the mediation between the right holders and the obligation holders. So, how do you consider that the national institutions of human rights can contribute to the Escazú Agreement implementation? We've seen that we have an important number of laws. So how can we implement them, and what's the role of the national human rights institutions? Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of José Apolonio Serrano. I would like to extend greetings from our president. I'm José Sandoval, and the human rights attorney is not going to be with us this morning, and he's put me in charge of sharing with you the answer to this question. Among the functions of the national human rights institutions, we can say that José Apolonio Tobar, according to its role as human rights attorney, in this country we have the international treaty, the Escazú Agreement, since vulnerability and environmental harm, the bad decisions that El Salvador has made for example, a project approval and other circumstances. The actions from our office haven't had any sustainable result for El Salvador since up until now, even though we are a part or we are in the negotiation process, is not a signing country of this agreement. The president has not signed the Escazú Agreement. However, from the human rights perspective, the attorney has promoted through the environmental board and the departmental office to emphasize the importance of having this international treaty. We have 13 departmental delegations, and they work towards communicating to people about the importance of the Escazú Agreement. From our office, we've tried to tell the local governments and also the Ministry of the Environment and the Salvadorian government, the executive branch, even though we have different regulations on access to justice, access to participation, this agreement is very important in that issue was protecting the environmental activists. And this connects with the Convention 169 And one of the actions of this institution in favor of the previous question, how this connects with the 169th Convention. There was an approval to build a dam, and this affected the indigenous communities. The right to participation was being breached for this group. However, through preliminary measures from this office, this project wasn't carried out. From the human rights point of view, we've taken appropriate actions. We've monitored the process. We have been very attentive. So the different institutions in charge of providing this legal instrument to El Salvador, well, and that's why having an Escazú agreement in place is so important. Unfortunately, despite our actions, we have not been able to sign this agreement. And what we've also been doing from this office is disseminate the information so the people can know about this, and they can know about the importance of having a legal instrument like the Escazú Agreement. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, José Sandoval. I think this example helps us see, and also for the human rights commissions, they've had a crucial role in trying to put this right in practice, because sometimes it could be a bit abstract, as many people said in the first session. So there are preliminary measures, there are legal elements that can help us implement this principle that is recognized in environmental law, and also these preliminary measures that help prevent human rights violations. Now, I'm going to present Patricia Mencay. She was born in the Kiwaro community in the Pastaza province in Ecuador. He is president of the Association of Guarani Women on the Ecuadorian Amazon. He's a human rights activist, and he's received recognition nationally and internationally. The question for Patricia is, what leverage point and innovation led by indigenous peoples can be used to implement the Escazú Agreement to achieve positive social and ecological outcomes in practice? Patricia, you have the floor. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to participate in these Escazú dialogues. Many of you don't know me. I'm a Guarani woman. I'm Patricia Mencay from the Amway Association. To us, is very important. The land is very important. Without land, we can do anything. Protecting the land is the first part. We've struggled to defend our rainforests in the Yasumi. There has been agreements with the oil companies, and we've seen that they have polluted our rivers, our forests in the Orellana province. So the Pastaza women, we've organized to fight against the mining and the oil and the timber industries. So we've generated economic alternative for the women of our territory through projects. Our grandmothers used to produce a craft now. This is what our grandmothers used to fish, to sleep. So how the Waurani women can survive? We cultivate raw materials, we put it near our houses, near our crop fields. So we take care as our grandmothers did. This way we maintain the techniques that were taught to us by our grandmothers. So the timber products are important to make canoes or houses. So we have greenhouses and we reforest the species near our houses. This is what we do. And we've done this since 500 years. Our ancestors never destroyed our forests. They lived healthy without diseases. Now we see that all this has changed. For example, with the COVID-19, many of the Waurani people got sick and they were cured with our plant medicines because our grandparents taught us how to mix the plants, and many of our women got sick, and in the hospitals they said that there's nothing they can do about it. There were no oxygen, but we were able to cure using medicinal leaves, and that way we could save them from COVID. We had 2 deaths, but this was because those people had previous conditions. The ones who stayed in the community were saved. That way we've worked from the community, and what we do, the women of the association, especially the grandmothers, we've worked in the reforestation of damaged areas for native species. For example, fruits that we can plant near our crops. We are teaching this to our young women so they can maintain this tradition and they can live off the forest. We've conserved many of the forests in the Yasuni. So this has been a great work done by all the women that we lead. Also regarding land, we've led a process to recognize our Waurani identity. Women have been on the front lines, and our territory was registered. So this has been an important struggle for women. We've articulated the work with the government and also some organization and private universities. And together with the civil society, we need to see who are the people on the front line working with the communities, taking care of our rainforest, the fauna, the water. This is all our work. So we need to show our houses, our kids, our schools. We need to show them what do we use the water for in the forest. So it's important for us as Waurani women to being able to support our families economically. This is our message for today. This is the work that we carry out as Waurani women. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Is the first presentations that we saw regarding ecosystem services and contributions from nature to us. This relates what you were talking about, the traditional knowledge that is recognized in the Biological Diversity Convention. Like David Sandoval said, there are many challenges for these countries, even though for the countries that haven't signed the Escazú Agreement. But all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are part of the Biological Diversity Convention and other treaties, also the Children's Rights Convention and Convention Against Discrimination of Women. So the crucial role of women that you present and also the traditional medicine and how helps exercise the right to health. That's very important. Now, before going to a Q&A session, we have the presentation by Paloma Costa Oliveira. He is member of the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group. He is a researcher for the Clinic for Human Rights. This is a joint intervention with Massimo Masocco from EcoHouse Global. He's the founder and general director of EcoHouse. It's an environmental organization with a lot of volunteers in Latin America. So, Paloma and Maximo, you have the floor. Hello, thank you for the invitation. I think that this agreement comes timely, especially for a region that is where there's more threats for environmental activists. In countries like Brazil, they haven't committed to the agreement as they should, but we as the young people, we're going to keep promoting actions and a participatory democracy with an effective participation so everybody can be included in the decision-making process. The effective participation is based mainly in three main points: access to information, to a transparent information, a quality education. This is why we and the young people are fighting for, and a space for participation. This is something that we've been building in our organizations, in our groups. We need to participate in this process. So I think that as part of this intervention, it would be great that people were able to participate, young people and children, and they also need quality education. This is one of the main things that we are promoting. And in that sense, now I'm gonna leave the floor to Maximo so he can complement on the ideas. Hello, how are you? We've seen very interesting interventions. We've been learning a lot. I would like to say that I would like to highlight, and this was said before, but without access to justice, without access to information, it's impossible to comply with any standard, regulation, or law that we may discuss regarding the environment. I think that we still, as mankind, and especially as a region, most people haven't comprehended the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. I don't think we are not really aware of the problem that we're facing. And we keep enacting laws, and in order to comply them, we need to change the whole production and consumption matrix. It's not that we're going to enact a new environmental law and automatically all the laws are going to be are going to adapt to it. For example, in Argentina, every time that we enact a law number 25,000, but what happened with all the previous law? We need to update the whole matrix because everything is based on the environment. So we, for example, had a climate change law, and first the population wasn't informed, and access to information is non-existent. We requested for information, and they never gave it to us. And if they gave it, it took 2 years. If we talk about the climate crisis, and we have a few years to mitigate it, I'm waiting for 3 years for an email reply. If we translate this to justice, if I have a lawsuit because the law is not being followed, how much does it take? It's going to take for a result, and I'm not accessing justice to find a culprit. I want to access the justice because planet Earth is at stake. I'm not going to be happy if one people ends up in jail or pays a fine. There is not any amount of money that can compensate the harm to the ecosystem. So we are before a complete legal crisis. The world legal system. Uh, yeah, I'm sorry, Maximo. I think it's very important to hear from young people. And we've been hearing this loud and clear, not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but throughout the world. Young people is speaking clearly about the challenges that we're facing. So it's really important to take this seriously and to take seriously what Patricia was saying. We cannot wait for all the solutions to come from the government. The government and young people, if they have no ideas, we are going to come up with no solutions. We don't have too much time, and I would like to start a dialogue. There's a question for Patricia. In which way the authorities have supported in your processes to conserve your territories? Go ahead, Patricia. Well, how are we working with the government? Well, we are part of the network that is working on climate change. So I'm a member of that roundtable, and I've discussed a lot about that topic. We are working on projects, and we are working together to reforest and different species. They didn't recognize our work before, but this roundtable was important to let them know what are our needs. We have 58 communities from 3 provinces. We are working in projects with almost half of the communities, so all the families can benefit from this in our community, especially women and senior citizens that don't have any stable jobs. Okay, there's a question and a comment related to what Paloma and Maximo mentioned. We need to recognize a 5th international crime, war crimes. There's a movement to recognize these ecocide crimes. And there's also more information available on the chat. Now, I don't know if any other participants with any final questions? Well, it says a good intervention from young people. Okay, so this is an urgent crisis. We need to approach it systematically and with collaboration. Now I'm gonna leave you with our last presenters so they can make a final comment in order to close this session. These sessions are going to continue. The next one is tomorrow. So please help us spreading the information. People can still register for tomorrow's session. So I would like to start hearing from Paloma and Máximo.
That were given since this morning. One final thought, something you would like to say, something you would like us all to take home. Paloma, the floor is yours. Thank you. Well, I believe that from our part, representing the youth, I believe that the most important thing we can give you from everything we've heard is that we need a space that can include everyone, in which everyone can participate, and that we can recover the hearts and the minds so people can have a productive space for creativity where it's possible to achieve the results that we want, and that we are heard in addition of hearing, but that we're given the space and that we are protected because we are the most vulnerable and we see the whole situation as a whole. I join on the urgent need for education, for sustainability and ecosystem development. Without education, we won't make the great changes that we need. Because if we don't know the laws that we have, if we don't know how to have access to justice, we don't know how to access information, it's going to be very difficult for this to move forward. So I would invest a lot into education as a young person. Thank you very much. Now, that's the participation of the youth. I would like to hear from Jose David Sandoval if he has any final thoughts. Well, nothing, just definitely share what was expressed by Paloma and the youth that came before me. That's a beautiful reflection when they say, there's a lot to discuss, there's much to be said, there's a lot in which to have an impact. I share in what my friend said, that it took him 1 or 2 months or more to get one bit of information. The same happens in this region. The same thing happens in my country. And therefore, what I could manifest is that let's not be quiet. Let's keep working on this. Let's keep building conscience on our territory. Like I said in Salvador, from our trenches, let's try and make an impact and raise awareness on the importance of the legal tools to protect and to tell the world that yes, like the young people were saying, in climate change, this is something that we have there in front of us. And the negative consequences that this brings are real. Best regards. Thank you very much, Jose. And okay, Patricia talked to us about this relevance of taking into account our historical realities of recognizing that entire ancestral knowledge that we have as Latin American region of the Caribbean, and also seeing the generation of infrastructure. So Patricia, you have the floor. Patricia, we can't hear you. Okay, Thank you. This is the work that we do, coming together as a nation from the civil organization, the foundations, United Nations, Escazú itself that has approved. So it's important to socialize to our youth, to our children, organizations, and so make our voices heard by the state. Many times, something else I forgot. In Target and Termanani, we were set aside. That's sad when it happens. So articulate the work. We have the same rights to have our voices heard, to get more contribution to civil organizations who are in the territory, to exchange experiences one with the other is important. That is what I can leave as a message, and I will continue participating. Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much to all who participated in this session. It has been an amazing dialogue in terms of seeing different perspectives of trying to understand this problem, this crisis of biodiversity, climate change, pollution, and how we have tools, how this collective action has to do with participation of the communities, of the young people, of all of us who can also contribute to make the implementation of the Escazú Agreement in synergy with the Sustainable Development Objectives, human rights, and these international agreements, bring them down into practice. And we've also heard from United Nations of how we can work hand in hand with these organizations. So with this, thank you very much, and we'll wait for you tomorrow for the second part of this series of dialogues. Thank you all.